Never left. So, yeah.
So you got your master's here?
I got a master's, so I got a master's at UCSD when I got my teaching credential, and that was just an MED, and then I got my ed tech master's at San Diego State. So I lived in San Diego. I did this fun thing where I went from San Diego to Alabama to San Diego to Georgia to Orange County. So I moved around a lot.
Your master's in ed tech, what kind of degree is that? It's not an MED?
It was an MA.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
And after you got the MA in ed tech, what was your first ed tech job that you got there?
So I was already working in the district office at San Diego Unified when I was getting my master's. So I had actually been a part of a STEM grant. So I taught at Roosevelt Middle School, and they were trying to implement more technology in science classrooms, which is where I was teaching. And so I was in the first year of this grant, and it went really well. It was a very mentory relationship grant, so they were like, "You're really good at this. You want to come be a resource teacher?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, of course I do." So it didn't quite work like that, because I forgot. I left and moved to Alabama, and then they're like, "We need a new resource teacher. Can you move back?" I'm like, "Yes."
So it was through word of mouth, because I'm nervous for all of us getting this degree of what entry-level jobs are going to be available for us all, basically. And I'm a teacher myself, and I don't want to go back in the classroom. I want to move into higher ed, but I'm like, even the instructional designer job here wants 3+ years of working with higher ed. So it's
well, so getting your foot in the door is true. It is something I think that many instructional designers kind of fall into it that way, where it just sort of falls in your lap. That's often a pathway, which is how it sort of worked for me. But I don't think it has to work that way. I think in terms of getting that 3+ years, you may have there are a lot of people who want contract instructional designers, they're not ready to hire someone full-time, so they'll contract someone. I know UCI had been doing that. I think they stopped doing that for their central instructional design unit, but a lot of times that's a really good way to get your foot in the door. And but in order to even get your foot in the door on that, having a portfolio, so something to show. So I think this iBook is actually a really great project because it's unique. I don't think a lot of people are going to have something like that to show. So if you have a really well-designed iBook, and you can also show expertise in these things that are, things that are needed, I think that is a really good way to go. The other thing that I think is a great way to go is if you already have some expertise in an area. I had a friend who was she a civil engineer? Something like that. And she wanted to do instructional design work, and she just used that area of expertise to make stuff for civil engineering. And that subject matter expertise is amazing. So if you have subject matter expertise in something, just as an example, it wasn't that long ago that Fender had a job opening, and I was like, oh my gosh, I would love to work for Fender, but I don't know anything about guitars or music. I'm terrible at it. But if you have this expertise in an area, finding something where someone wants that kind of design, it exists. You wouldn't think guitars would need instructional designers, but they wanted one, and they had really cool widgets online for tuning your guitar, and so that's just one example.
Well, in Jason's background, whether you want to talk about your Navy and the avionics and the avionics.
Yeah, but I kind of faked my way through the Navy, so I'm not. I'm concerned that this degree, that the people that are hiring instructional designers want them to lean more heavily on the programming tech side. And I'm concerned about that because I'm definitely more on the education side. I feel much more comfortable with pedagogy than I do with programming. Not to say that I think all of us are, after seeing presentations and stuff, are pretty savvy with just basic design and graphic design and stuff. But yeah, that's what I'm concerned is they're going to put me in front of, or any of us in front of a computer and say, code it to look this way,
I think that is a growing area of interest, but a lot of times instructional designers, I think, it depends on where you go. So I tend to think of instructional design as having sort of two hats. There's the educational side of instructional design, and there's the training side of instructional design. And so if you go into the training route, there are jobs, I have a friend who works at Experian, and she does the corporate compliance training, and so she doesn't have to learn to code. She just needs to know the tools that they use for doing for their training.
Right.
And then I had a friend who worked for Lockheed Martin, and it was the same sort of thing. Like, it was really about training. I think he didn't work for Coke. He had friends who worked for Coke. What was his other job that was a big corporate? That was when I lived in Atlanta. But there are a lot of people who want just straight up training. And, you know, there are the tools that are most commonly used for that. Like, I think a lot of people use Articulate Storyline and Captivate and Rise and a few other tools that are pretty user-friendly. And then I also think that coding is going to go more to visual design. Like, I think that
To become more and more user-friendly.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't see how it wouldn't, because it's not, like, you have kids coding programs that are building blocks, and it really wouldn't be hard to build so many coding things that way.
But typically, in your experience, is it something that they're like, okay, nice that you're here, here are the programs that we use, now we're going to train you how to use our programs, or is it like, we expect you to already know how to use these programs that we use?
Yeah. Yeah. So just as another example, there was someone we almost hired at UCI the first time I was there. She had never done instructional design. She was actually coming straight out of a program. And she had this beautiful visual resume that she made with Articulate Storyline. And, I mean, we didn't end up hiring her, but it was not because of her skills. It was because of her interview. And so, like, I think that if you can have a portfolio that really catches people's eye, because I know that caught our eye, and then come in ready to talk pedagogy, because I know when I've been in charge of hiring, like, if people can show me something technically proficient but it doesn't demonstrate good pedagogy, like, there's no way I would hire that person, because to me, the technical side is easy to teach. The sense of pedagogy is very difficult.
Yeah.
And also the sense of design. So,
Okay.
yeah, that would be my 2 cents as a person that does hiring.
No, that's comforting. That's
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, it's like that math teacher that, or math professor that knows, or biology that knows their, you know, their stuff inside and out, but they can't teach with it down.
Right.
Yeah, it's just, they give you the material, you know, and they're not sensitive to people's learning, and as you said, they don't know the teaching side, and I think that's one of the cool things about instructional design and educational technology, is that you have people that know the technical side, and it may not be coding, or maybe a little coding, but also they know the pedagogy and how to deal with people.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, big time. Like, I mean, I think that's one of the things I love about instructional design is it takes in so many different kinds of skills. Like, people skills are so important. Project management skills are so important. And design, having good design, and then, like, the technical skill is one thing, but if you have everything else and you are willing to learn the technical, that's a big deal. I do think with, like, if you have a fear of coding, I mean, I think so many coding languages, like, you learn one and you kind of get how it thinks, and then you sort of move on to another, and you can sort of start, like, they become easier to learn the more you do.
Yeah.
So,
No, it's not that it's, I mean, it is intimidating. If it's necessary, I want to do it, you know, and so I, like, if it's absolutely essential to that job, then I want to try to look into supplementing it.
well,
But it sounds like it's something that isn't necessarily a priority, and if it is, you could learn it pretty
yeah.
quickly.
Well, and I'll tell you another secret. I don't know how many projects I have where I use JavaScript, but can I code JavaScript? No, not at all. But are there places I can go to get snippets of JavaScript code that do what I need to do?
Mm-hmm.
And I can easily just, okay, oh, there's the variable, or this is what the variable state needs to be. Like, you don't have to be able to code from scratch. You just have to be able to find the resource that's going to tell you how to do it and implement it.
Okay.
So, yeah, that would be my other 2 cents about that. Okay. So, I think this is my understanding of your mission, so correct me if I'm wrong. But you are in the process of finalizing your research on, okay, and that you have to create an iBook, and that you will be presenting your research and iBook in some form. Yes,
Yeah, I'm doing mine as a Google Classroom.
and not an iBook.
Right.
Okay, so that's helpful to know. And I actually think that I can skip all of these, although they're kind of fun. Okay, I'm going to go back. Two. Wait, let's see. Which one? So you're not doing an iBook, so I don't think, no, we're small. We don't need
Yeah, you don't have to do that book, it's an option now.
Okay. But how many of you are doing iBooks?
Still debating.
Still debating. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about design, cognitive principles of design, the more aesthetic principles. I do want to talk a bit about the iBook features, but I probably won't spend too much time on that. More talk about the logistics of iBooks and a couple cool things, since it sounds like not everyone will be using them. And then I did this a year or so ago, and I forget what those parentheses mean, so I don't know what that means. I think it means that we're going to do those. Oh, I remember what it, no, I don't remember what those mean. So I'm totally going to ignore the parentheses there because I have no idea what it means. But I want to talk about the logistics, especially the slide, going back from a slides to an iBook if you are using an iBook or presenting iBook only. And if you're doing Google Classroom, you may have a similar thing where you want to go back and forth from slides. So just some logistical things. I know last year people appreciated a couple of those tips, but I don't know. I mean, things change, so maybe you all know all these things.
And they've seen, and they have access, and a lot of them have seen the last year's projects. So they've seen what people have done, and so I said, for today, like, if you've seen this or you've looked at stuff, it's like, how do I do this? Or I want to do something like that, or, in Google Classroom, like embed a video or podcast, or like whatever. So
they're ready with questions if they want to know how to use it.
Hopefully, yeah.
Okay. So I want to start with cognitive principles of design. This is like one of my favorite things to talk about. So like, how do you make sure that your audience walks away with your message? And I think that's by thinking about both cognitive and visual design principles, because they tend to go hand in hand. And I'm going to talk about 4 cognitive principles. So dual encoding, which some of these you probably are familiar with. Dual encoding principle, cognitive load, split attention, and schema building. And so how these go together and how they relate to like visual design principles, because they do. And there's a reason that aesthetic design principles are what they are. They tend to refer to these cognitive principles. And so you know all about how when someone is presenting, or if you're reading from an iBook, that the goal is to have whatever is happening in working memory, because people are chugging along using as much working memory as they can, but if there's limited quantities, and trying to take all of that and translate it into that long-term memory. So what are things that help to make that happen? So dual encoding principle, how many of you are familiar with this principle? Yeah.
I remember it, and then I'm looking off the picture, you do it through different senses, right? I would gauge at least 2 different senses.
Right. And so like dual encoding is the idea that you learn best when you have information coming on both channels. And it's not that like I can learn physics with my eyes by reading, and at the same time someone can talk to me about art history and I'll learn both. That's not how it works. That if you have 2 complementary messages through your eyes and your ears, you actually learn better. And there are some fun studies about this. So they tried giving a presentation with just text, where people were reading. They tried just audio, text with images, just audio, and then with both. And it was a marked difference when you had both, where they're complementing and reinforcing each other, that it produces a lot more learning. So having those pictures and words. Okay, so thinking about this, your slides or whatever you're presenting with the book is that visual story, and so you want to complement but not replicate the message. So we want that message reinforced but not replicated, actually. And then cognitive load principle. Now this is actually a really interesting one, and there's sort of this dogma in instructional design that you're supposed to reduce cognitive load, but there's fun research that's starting to contradict that in some ways, which I don't want to complicate the idea of cognitive load before I present it, but that, there are actually 3 kinds of loads, but the kind of load we're going to worry about is the germane load, like whatever relates to what we're talking about and what I want you to learn, and then there's the extraneous load, the stuff that really isn't part of the message. And so the dogma of instructional design is like, get rid of all that extraneous load that's distracting from your message. And so examples of that were like ridiculous amounts of animations and things like that. That's distracting you, and it's causing extraneous load on your working memory, so you're not able to like translate as much to long-term memory. Now I'll give you an example of some interesting research that actually contradicts this, but for the most part, it's true that you want to reduce extraneous load. The one guy that I especially love, he has a YouTube channel called Veritasium, and he lives in Australia. His name is Derek Mueller, and he's really interested in STEM. He was a science teacher and then got his PhD, and he was really interested in videos for science. Like, what are the best videos to present scientific information? And he had clear and correct presentations of science, and then he had ones where they started with, here's how the ball goes through the air. It goes through the air because it has a force pushing it forward. And the students are like, oh yeah, yeah. And they're like, no, that's not how it works. So they start with the misconception and then sort of jar you out of passivity and then give the clear, correct interpretation of the clear, correct explanation. And so what his research has shown is that the students actually learned better when you started with the misconception. And people might think, well, that's extraneous load. Like you're giving them wrong information rather than just focusing on the correct information. But that's an example where actually showing them they didn't know was probably more important than going to the clear and correct explanation of the material.
Isn't that cognitive dissonance?
Yeah,
is, right?
yeah.
You shift their previous expectations or whatever.
Yeah, and
reinforces.
especially with video, people tend to be very passive. And I know I do this. Like, I'll watch an online lecture and I'm just like, yeah, I get it. I don't have to keep watching it. I get it. It all makes sense. But you're not really processing it at the level that you need to be, so you kind of have to be pushed out of that, where you realize, oh, I actually don't get this. Okay, I better pay attention more. That's one example. But another interesting example, just for fun, is that they found that, like, usually they think if you write with handwriting that's very clear and easy to read, that you'll learn more. But they found that you actually learn more when it's harder to read because you're working harder to read it. Like, there's one study like that. Yeah. And so those are two examples that kind of slightly contradict this reduction of cognitive load principle, but still, by and large, you want to reduce the extraneous load and focus on
all the bells and whistles and stuff
Right.
flying in.
Right, like when you want something to be like a metaphor, like this, like hopefully the visual representation of a metaphor isn't extraneous, it's actually creating what we're going to talk about next, which is helping refer to your schema. So if I say the word farm, you probably each have a different thing that comes to mind. For me, I think about my grandparents' farm where they raised Holstein cows. One of you might have gone to a farm or had a family farm and they did something else, like raised horses. Or maybe your main association with the word farm is Sesame Street or some other show that's like your first introduction to farms. Like, who knows? We all have different schema and different ways that we make sense of the world. And so ideas are sort of hung on hooks in our brains in different ways. But we do tend to have overlapping and similar schema as well. And so when we use these schema to help people make sense of information, it's actually much better. So this is helping to reveal the architecture of the information and using metaphors, narratives, and other things that are familiar in your design. One thing that I just read, was it today or yesterday, that artificial intelligence in looking at human writing has recognized 6 major narratives in that writing. And these are like, narratives are the way that we make sense of almost everything. In fact, the hero's journey, the monomyth, is like this pathway of storytelling that we, like every culture around the world, has this sort of way of telling stories. So this structure is part of all of our schema, and if you utilize it in a presentation, it can actually be really effective in helping people make sense of where am I in the learning path. So a course that's organized around the hero's journey might start with like a quest, right? Like, this is what we're going to do. And then you have all these challenges, and you reflect on those challenges, and then by the end you realize, oh my gosh, this is what I've learned. You have this achievement, and you return then to your ordinary world stronger and better because you've had this experience. And so you can see it in almost every movie that you've ever seen, is this structure. But there are different versions of it. And AI actually, and this is in The Atlantic, they have the rags to riches kind of story. There's the riches to rags kind of story, the opposite. Man in a hole, fall then rise. The Icarus, rise then fall. The Cinderella, rise then fall then rise. But these are what AI has recognized. The Oedipus, fall then rise then fall. And So these are structures that can actually be really good for organizing even your presentation. Like if you think about, like, actually I want to take a minute. Can you see any way that you could use one of these structures to present your research?
I'm thinking with your English background as an English teacher,
Yeah?
some of these probably make sense.
It makes sense, but how to translate them to like research, you know, which is very dry and not open to a lot of interpretation, right?
Well, so think of it more as the way of telling the story of your research. So the story of your research might be, there is this problem, there is this lack, there is this way that we are working in poverty as teachers that this actually makes better. Or maybe your research is more like this. Things looked really promising. I thought it was amazing. Then I was like, oh no, it turns out I'm wrong. This isn't going to work out the way that I thought it was. But there's a bright side, because the way it didn't work out is really interesting. So
giving the presentation of the information a sort of narrative, almost rise and fall,
yes.
gives more stakes, it makes it more engaging, right?
Right.
Okay.
And especially when you let people know sort of where you're going with this. Like that you present it in a way that feels like narrative, can give it that sort of way. They're like, oh, I get where this is going. Okay, cool. And it's easier for people to follow along. A lot of times presentations that don't give you sort of that meta structure up front are harder to follow. When you know the story of the presentation ahead of time, you're ready for it. Oh, I get where this is going. Oh, okay. Or if you tell them, like, I'm going to tell you a story of like some of my challenges, but then how I overcame them, you know what's coming, effectively.
And I think what was in some of our early conversations last fall with what's driving you was when you were teaching on the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about the using digital or going digital, and that you saw this vision. And so you see, so now that's the rise.
Yeah.
This is, or the fall. This is what what was lacking.
Okay.
This is the rise.
So don't think of it so much as like a dry research.
Yeah.
Are you right? Like a content analysis essay.
The
You
re-
can
the-
think of it more.
The research
as,
is the research. If somebody asks you a question, the research helps support the answer.
Yeah.
The justification
But
for
we're
it.
not just explaining facts necessarily. We
Yeah,
are telling
exactly.
a story. We're painting a picture. We're creating the context and the scenario, right?
Right. The more you can find that, the better your data will be received. Because I think that unfortunately we see this all the time. We just aren't persuaded by data alone.
Right.
It has to kind of fit into this narrative that's like, I get this narrative. Like, just to give you one more example, Cinderella would probably be my experience of online education. I started out very optimistic about online. I thought, oh, online is wonderful. It's providing access to people who don't have it. This is using technology to do good. And then I was like, oh my gosh, but almost every online course in the world is terrible. I don't believe it anymore. I don't think any course should ever be online. And I could actually provide the data to back these things up, to tell this story. And then realizing that, actually if you think about the affordances of online, you're creating a course that takes advantage of those affordances rather than trying to replicate what happens face to face. You can actually make courses that are as good as or better. So that would be my sort of story of that realization. And so hopefully your data has a realization and a story behind it that it can be a helpful narrative, a helpful way to structure a presentation at least. But even within your presentation, so slide by slide, there's an architecture to the information that you're presenting that you want to think about. If you think about PowerPoint in general, what kind of structure of information does it most lend itself to?
Bulleted.
Yeah, bulleted what?
Main points.
Yeah.
Key points.
Or bulleted list, so yeah, exactly. It is well suited to information that the architecture of it is a list. So ironically, this is a slide that I pulled from the internet. This is information that actually should be presented as a list, but the person didn't do it that way. So if you look at the slide, it's got Public Works Administration gave people jobs building projects such as schools, courthouses, roads, post offices, and bridges. But they didn't present it showing the architecture of the information. So when it just comes up as that, you don't have the visual cues that tell you that structure of that information. So if you were to like, you eliminate extraneous load, get rid of the duplication, there we go, of those words, and some of the other extraneous words, you can get to a slide that actually shows the architecture of the information. But most information that you'll be presenting probably won't be bulleted lists, right? It might be a compare and contrast. It might be statistics and data. And so just making sure that as you construct your slides, that the information on each slide really reveals the architecture of what you're talking about. Is it something comparing and contrasting? Is it a list? Is it steps in a process? You know, there are different architectures, and it's important to reveal those in your presentation. The other thing is split attention. This is the fourth cognitive principle. So, that I want to talk about. I don't know if you've ever been at a presentation where there's a quote up on the slide, and the person reads it while you're trying to read it. Okay, do you ever have this thing where it's like you realize you're reading it faster than they are, or they're reading it faster than you are, and you kind of lose it because you're trying to follow along? So that's an example of split attention, where although the information coming in both your eyes and your ears is the same, you're sort of divided because it's replicating the information, and you have to kind of choose which one you're going to focus on. And it's sort of like the same split attention that, like, if you're at a presentation, you have your computer, you have the speaker, and like you have to choose, what is my main focus? What am I focusing visually on this? Am I focusing visually on that? I used to teach a lot of workshops when I was at Georgia State on Excel and all these other tools, but this Excel is the one that I want to talk about. So one day the projector went out when I had to teach Excel, like before we even started. And in some ways, it was the best class I ever taught, because what used to happen, and you may have seen this before, you're showing someone how to do it, but someone's distracted in the room, and then what do? They're like, wait,
how'd you get there?
How did you do that? And you're like, okay, let me show you again. The rest of the class is like, oh my gosh, why don't you pay attention? And then, but they're trying to do whatever's the last thing you just told them to do. And so once I didn't have the projector and they couldn't look anymore, they could just focus on the doing and listening as they did it. So they didn't have that split attention anymore. It was hard for me because I had to remember how Excel worked without having anything in front of me, but it did. It was probably the best class I ever taught. And so you want one audio point of focus and one visual point of focus. So just as an example, if you are presenting with an iBook, and people in the audience will have probably have an iPad where they can follow along on their book, or are they mostly?
It's whatever you recommend. It's both. It's in the past, people have had tablets and have had their, and it's like, you know, and it's exactly what you are explaining, where it's like, follow along. Mm-hmm. And it was like, wait, how'd you get over there?
Right.
And so it's up to the presenter.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would say keep this in mind, knowing that people are going to miss what you're saying. If you're asking them to follow along and they're split between what you're doing and what you're asking them to do, it's one of those things that tends to cause problems. And so unless there's a really easy way for them to follow along or for you to control their device, it can cause this difficulty. Not that that's a bad thing, but I mean, not entirely a bad thing, but it does pose a challenge. Okay, visual design principles. I'm going to bet you've probably heard of these before. Contrast, repetition, alignment, proximity, yes? All right, I love that it spells crap, it makes me laugh. And there's just, oh no, I see that there's going to be a problem with my next slide. There's supposed to be a picture there, which it's missing because...
Unprofessional.
Yeah, but poor alignment can make your message seem jumbled and unprofessional. Whenever I see slides that look like this, I'm like, oh my gosh. Or where the alignment is just like a little bit off, you're like,
oh, that's on purpose.
Yeah, this is on purpose.
You said, oh no, I was like, oh, I feel bad. I was like, oh.
Well, no, I am missing a picture. There was a picture there. But
Oh.
the interesting thing about this, though, it does convey a mood. So let's say that what you wanted to do was convey chaos. Like, this actually would be a good setup to show chaos. But if that's not the mood you're going for, if you're trying to look sleek and professional, then you want good alignment that feels like this is the same amount of information but aligned better. I have no idea why the pictures aren't showing up. That's funny. Wow. Oh, it's happening to all my slides. That's weird. Why would pictures not show up? Because they were not web-based pictures. Huh. Okay, well, that's sad. Because what I had was some pictures of Guy Kawasaki. He is sort of one of those, have you ever heard of Guy Kawasaki? Let me see if I can pull up one of his presentations. I'm not going to. Too much work. He is the master of these contrast, alignment, repetition principles. Like, he will use color as like a signaling device. So the one that I wanted to show you was his talking about professionalism, and he uses this repetition of colors and then repetition of the symbol of a butterfly for the good thing. So he'll show the, now I can't remember the names of the smiles, but there's the fake smile, like you can totally tell it's fake when people smile like this, you know, but they do it all the time. And then there's the actual like genuine smile where the eyes are involved. And so he was showing the difference between these things and dressing for a job. And whenever it was what you should do, there was a little butterfly. And so using that repetition of that symbol reinforces his ideas. This is another slide that, what of the cognitive principles I talked about, which one is this violating right now? It might be violating more than one.
Well, cognitive load.
For sure.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Probably extraneous.
Yeah, there's a lot of extraneous load here, probably. I would say the other thing that it's missing is it's not presenting this information in a way that would help me make sense of it. So there's not any support for me as a learner to hook this onto ideas in my head. If I really pull it apart, I'll see that it has this structure, this who, what, when, where structure. Like, it's buried in there. You've got when, who, what, where, but it's not presenting it in that way. And so if that was what was important, they maybe could change it to be like this. But I'm going to bet that most of that is extraneous. The other thing that they did was they talked about two different compounds on the same slide. So maybe there's a reason to talk about both on the same slide, like maybe they're trying to make a point by comparing the two, but if so, it's way too much information and they need to focus on whatever that difference is, so then they would do it as a compare and contrast where they're showing the whatever that important point of comparison is. But, oh yeah.
I was going to say, do you find that in your job that the previous slide is somebody that is a subject matter expert versus that doesn't have any instructional design background?
You mean like when I get slides from people that I have to...
Yeah, it's like, yeah, I want to, we've talked in the past, like, yeah, we want to put this course online. Here's what here's what it looks like. And that's when you go like, oh my God.
Yeah. And I actually, so I've been lucky recently as people have actually not had PowerPoint presentations already. They just write their lectures and I say, oh, can I build your slides for you? And so that actually has worked well. But I had worked at the Mirage School of Business at UCI, and then people did have slides that they gave me that were, and then part of our job was to take them and translate them into a structure that makes them easier for people to digest. But yeah, and I would guess most of this is extraneous load anyway, so even though we put it in a structure that helps people make sense of it, most of it's probably irrelevant, and that really something like this, which is like if you compare to the first slide, is significantly easier to digest. And even this isn't maybe the best, but it's a step in the right direction, and I actually don't know what the goal of that information is, what they were presenting, but I'm pretty sure they weren't achieving it with their slide. Okay. I don't want to spend too much time on iBooks, so I guess I'll stop there for a second before I go to iBooks and features to ask like what I can help with in terms of just designing your iBooks or designing whatever presentation, or what questions you guys have.
Well, Frank, are you writing, I can't remember, has it changed, are you writing a traditional, like, paper?
I was still debating on how I wanted to do it. I was planning to go the iBook route, but it was more so, pretty much I'm still trying to figure out how I want it to flow when I can finally get my results and everything to make sense, but I don't even know what kind of results I'm getting to then, you know, like, are they going to be good, are they going to be bad, why are they bad, why are they good, but then also putting that in a nice format and flow better, it's going to be interesting.
Okay. All right.
And yeah, I don't know whether you want to speak about, you know, and maybe it will help some of these people, the people. You mentioned something about compare, contrast, and we've all seen a lot of presentations that have tables and graphs and things like that. So, is there a best way to display those or put those in and talk about them, or you know, especially, you know, pre-post, compare, contrast?
Yeah, I think that it's tough to talk about that generally because it always depends on what the information looks like. But I think that the best thing that you can do in designing your presentation is to have empathy for the people who don't know your content. So like, I don't know how many presentations I've been to where there's presentations of statistics and charts and graphs, and it's just large amounts of information put on the slide without any really help in helping you make sense of what you see. So even like having, if you have this giant table and you want to call attention to one row, like have it stand out in some way, like have it be highlighted in yellow or whatever design you're doing. But ways to help, and I think it's okay, like sometimes it's really good to have a lot of information in tabular form or in a chart, but then like having something that moves the people's eyes in helping them make sense of it. So having something that animates on and then disappears and animates somewhere else. Like I was just working on this presentation for an economics teacher who's doing,
You need a,
yeah,
I don't know which one works.
all right. And let's see if I can remember how this looked. And do I remember supply curve versus demand curve? I have told, like, when I left the business school, they tried to hire me back, and I was like, I don't want to work for a business school. Like, I just don't get business. So one of these is a supply curve, one of those is a demand curve. I don't know which one it is. And then she was talking about how this is the market rate, I think, and then, but if you, there was some way that you wanted, there was like all this stuff on here, and then, but then there was a line that needed to move to go somewhere else, and so it started out as something where I was like, I looked at it and I'm like, I know what the words are you're gonna say when this is up there, but I look at that and I have no idea how what this shows translates to what you're talking about, and so it became a situation where that was the key, is figuring out how should these build on the slide. And once we knew how they should come in and how they fit with the order of what she's talking about, it all came in beautifully. And I was like, oh, I get it now, because this had, oh, I think it was more like this. This line had to move in, but when I first saw it, I was like, I can't make sense of this. And
So,
once we knew how to have it build, it was perfect. So having that empathy for your learner and like the way you're talking it through, have it appear or direct their eye in that order. Yeah.
So is that a pretty typical thing where you're confronted by people who want you to design something for them that you have no idea about the content?
Oh yeah.
And then each time you just have to get like a little brush up lesson by them?
So a lot of times, I mean, working with subject matter experts is one of those things that is one of the biggest challenges, is there's a reason they're the subject matter expert, and so a lot of times you get something, and what works best for me is to get a whole bunch of their stuff up front. So I would get a week's worth of lessons ahead of time, and then I would do everything I could to make sense of it, and then I'd be like, if these are the questions I have, and so then we would have very focused conversations to make sense of it, because a lot of it, I didn't really, like,
You
she
have
had
to Google a lot of it or something yourself,
Right.
Okay.
Right. So when I can, I try to make sense of it myself. But like, there are times where I get something and I'm just like, oh man, I'm gonna need some help. And I told her afterwards, I said that made my brain hurt, but I'm glad that I figured that out eventually. So anyway, that would be my main recommendation for presenting data and information. Okay.
So do you guys have questions about, I don't know, embedding videos, audio, hyperlinks, structure, I guess widgets. Widgets is cool.
Is that still a requirement that they have a certain number of widgets? Or?
Yeah, or even letting them know what a widget is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because you've had a little bit exposure last semester with John and Linda on some iBook, and I think there was some confusion then. Am I creating an iBook? Am I writing a paper? Like their heads were exploding as far as, am I doing two different things?
And it is that they're doing sort of two different things, and
Well,
one is more of a practitioner presentation of
yeah,
information, and one is a research.
Yeah, the kind of the biggest change in the program has been when, you know, in first semester it was, okay, when you graduate, ultimately, what job do you want to have? Is it like, I still want to be a classroom teacher, I want to be an instructional designer, I want to be a trainer? And so with that in mind, it was your end project, as you said, it's your portfolio when you go for that job.
Yeah.
So in some ways, the iBook in the past restricted individuals, and they just took their research model, their research plan, and they translated it into an iBook. And so there was a lot of people struggling with, how do I do this? I feel like I'm replicating. So I think we're still, how do we make that transition?
So that's where I think the idea of the narrative is going to come in really handy for both the presentation that you make and for whatever practitioner display of the information you make. Because your research paper is going to be dry. Like, research papers are dry. Like, every once in a while you read one and it's like, oh, that was really kind of fun to read. But mostly it's here are my methods, here, you know, it's not exciting. But the one you make for practitioners, you don't want it to be dry. It should sort of drive and motivate them. So the more that you can tell, like, create those moments where they're like, oh, yeah, I need to learn more about this.
Like a lot of people are doing how-to
Yeah.
or instruction manuals.
Yeah, and that seems like a much better way to set that up rather than a replication of your research. So one, I would recommend these E.O. Wilson Life on Earth iBooks, just because they're so high-end. I mean, some of the stuff in here would take a lot, but if you look at some of the things that they do, they use a lot of widgets to show information in a way that's very engaging. And include videos. And all of these are done with widgets. This one I think is just a picture, or it's a gallery. Oops. Oh, there we go. Is it really only 2 pictures in that gallery? That's sad. I feel like a gallery should have
So,
one too.
so something like that, I think, you know, like you said, a gallery or stuff being overlaid would be a good way to represent some data in graphs and things like that.
And I also think these question ones are really good, relating to that I really am curious to see how Derek Wheeler's research about science videos translates to other fields. Like, how much, like, as someone's reading, can you kind of push them out of passivity by having a question like this that shows they don't know the thing that you were going to talk about? Like, you could ask a series of questions to the reader right up front that will kind of tell them what the findings are in your research. Like, you know, how much of a difference do you think it makes to have Google Classroom be a part of, and here are some options, and then they guess, and then you don't tell them the right answer, or I think you might have to tell them the right answer.
Until the very end.
Well, I think if you do it a question like this, maybe there's a way to do it where it doesn't give you the answer, but I think it would. But it still would be interesting to prime them in that way, and then to have something that entices them to learn why. You know, yes, this is the right answer, but why? What did we see? And so then they can go through and see that information. So priming the reader in that way with something up front to get them interested would be, I think, a cool way to do it. Use these widgets. Also, you can embed keynotes, so having a series, oh, that's the one I just did, having a series of slides that tell a story too with keynote, because it's a nice way, oh. I am pretty sure I'm not paying attention to this, but obviously it's the scientific method, but that would be neat to do too. So these kind of drag and drop situations. Now, I do want to call attention, this is one of the logistical things that I would recommend. If you do present, if you are presenting with both slides and iBooks author, you're going to have to spend some time going back and forth. And if you're going to present your book, I recommend bookmarking certain pages. Because you notice, I have skipped from page 10 to page 35 with just a few clicks. You're probably not going to want to go through your book like this. Your book is probably too long. And also, you don't want to be like, okay, wait, where's that next thing that I want to talk about? Like, if you prepare ahead of time, I want to show this part of my iBook first, I want to show this part of my iBook second, and you bookmark it, that will help you a lot. Also, another thing that's kind of fun, that is not the one I want, is this one. You can highlight as well. So if you have a really dense page, but really what you want to highlight is one key passage in there, when you're presenting your book, you can easily just highlight and it's ready to go to direct people's attention. That's part of that, helping direct people, because this massive text for an audience member is way too much, but this way you're sort of showing, and this is what I want you to look at. So those would be two of my probably biggest tips if you do present with iBooks Author, is prepare by putting bookmarks and putting highlights. You can even put notes, which shows up in an interesting way. I think I have a note in here. Is it not here? Ah, here we go. So there's a note here, and then I can just click on it to show what I want to highlight. So if I have a text, like I could even ask my audience while I'm presenting, this is a nice way to do this. You have a highlighted text and you say, so what is the blah, blah, blah? You know, what is the principle that blah, blah, blah? And poll your audience while you're presenting and then say, well, here's the answer. So there are some cool tricks with iBooks Author that can help you.
So I was thinking about what you said about, priming them, because a lot of people use like poll anywhere.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, like, if right off the bat, kind of the hook, the anticipatory set of a lesson or your presentation, is there a way to embed like polling, like a real-time polling web page or something in your iBook? Or how do you suggest something like that?
Where it aggregates that information?
Yeah, like poll anywhere or everywhere will do it automatically or give you the bar graphs, but I'm just wondering.
That was one of my concerns with the iBook, is it seemed like the widgets and the customizable options was somewhat limited, right?
Well,
Right?
it is. But this was my third tip, and I forgot about this one until you just said that. There is a website called Bookry that has a whole bunch
That's
of
right.
widgets.
I remember them talking about that.
Yeah,
That's
so, oh man, I'm in the wrong browser, that is the problem. So for example, like you can embed like a Google map. So I'm kind of thinking any website you can probably embed with Bookry.
Okay.
So if nothing else, you ought to be able to, it might work with Poll Everywhere, but I'm not positive, but one way I'm pretty sure would work is if you had a Google form that you embedded in the book, and they did it on one page, and then on the next page you had because you can publish a chart in Google's spreadsheet. So if you send the data to the Google spreadsheet, and then already have a chart based on the data that comes in that is published, and you could have that image be in your book.
Okay,
Then, as people answer, it should show the aggregated data.
okay,
But within the book itself, no, I don't think there's a way to aggregate data, so you'd have to use something external. And it may work with, let's try to pull everywhere. Let's see if which of the,
or Padlet or something like that.
Padlet for sure.
Yeah.
I'm positive you can just get a website. So like, yeah, you just create a widget and there are tons of different ones. Yeah, browser. So you could just
Okay.
grab some page, the web page URL, so Padlet would be kind of
Okay,
awesome.
yeah,
Yeah, I love that idea.
yeah.
But yeah, so really with Bookry, the world's kind of your oyster. There's so many
Or
already
even
built.
have that at the very end for, feedback, have a Padlet thing and they just put a couple comments.
So the benefit of that is instead of like a link that they'll click and then it'll take them to Padlet, the Padlet's already on there on the page.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah. And and these all work with the HTML widget. So basically you download whatever widgets you create with Bookry and you use the HTML widget in iBooks Author, which is very hard to use otherwise. Like this tool makes it very easy to use the HTML widget, and there are so many options, like checklists that the users complete, drag and match. I mean, there's just a ton. So this is fun to amp it up and provide other options that iBooks Author by itself doesn't really provide.
Is there something similar, does Bookry work for Google Classroom then? Because I know Google Classroom is basically just a blank template.
I don't
Right.
think so. This is really designed, like the output that you download.
So that's one of the downfalls of Google Classroom then, right? The stuff you can do on it, interactive wise, is somewhat limited.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's limited because I think you can
Oh, I
do
guess
a
the-
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true, there's like 15 or 12
Unless, a way around that would be, unless you created an iBook as a shell in the Google Classroom would, because you could put the web page or the browser in there, so you can embed your Google Classroom link inside your iBook.
different.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. And then your iBook is housing everything, and then like your presentation, your
Yeah.
videos, your
So maybe just a small portion is done
Yeah.
through interactive Google Classroom
right,
stuff.
yeah.
Okay. Alright, I'll give this a thought.
Yeah. And
Okay.
then I think that I only had really one more important tip, which if you, I hate that this is going to do that. Hold on, I have to change something about my settings so that I can really demonstrate this well. Let's see. I don't know where's the button. See, I don't use the backside anymore, so now I don't know where the button is that I tell it I don't want to use presenter view. Is that it? Oh, alright, good. Okay, so I think if you do use the iBook and a presentation route like that, is the task switching cost of going from one thing to another can slow you down, especially, but like if you have, for example, let's say that you had, I don't know, you wanted to show your school district's, you had a couple resources you want to show that were on the web. Like, let's say this is one of the things I wanted to show when I was presenting. Oh my gosh, my mouse has disappeared. I hate when it does that. Okay, let's try something where I can just go directly. We'll go to CNN.com. Who knows what news is there? Oh, the scandal of higher ed. That's a fun one. Depressing. Okay, but the point is that if you have a couple resources ready to go before you step up to the plate, so you have your presentation, and then you have the websites that you want to go to queued up, you can just use that command tab to go between things really quickly. And so if you don't use command tab if you're on a Mac or
Control.
is it control? Well, control is one of them, but then one of the same keys and tab on the PC. Now I can't remember which key I use for that, but it'll do the same thing. Switch
PCs.
quickly.
Control for PC.
Control for PC?
I just converted, so I remember.
Oh, okay, cool. But yeah, so that is a super useful way to like just quickly go back and forth, and like I would Turn off your notifications, because there's nothing more embarrassing than having like, oh, my
Dinner
friend just
reservation.
slacked me. I do that all the time. I forget.
Frank, how's your presentation going?
Yeah.
The trackpad should be interactive too, so if you use three, I think it's what, 3-finger, 4-finger swoop,
Mhm.
it pulls open all your windows and
That's true.
programs.
Yeah.
Just click to each one you want.
But usually you're only kind of going between two things, so Command Tab, just like a quick, you're there. So you don't even have to have that motion, that time switch where, yeah. So that would be my only other recommendation is for that switch. But yeah, having a plan, I think, is the biggest. Like, it can be nerve-wracking to present, and if the more you're prepared, the more you come in ready, like, that will be good. I think I don't have anything more unless you have questions.
It's just like designing a lesson plan, right? You have to
Yeah.
anticipate each
Yeah.
step and what the audience, how the audience is gonna react and that sort of thing, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
We should all be good at that, I'm sure.
yeah, and recognizing ways to engage people and create motivation to stay with you. I mean, that's one of the biggest tricks when you present it.
Yeah.
All right.
Do you have any recommendations over the use of a template, like a pre-made template versus starting from a blank canvas?
Oh, yeah, I would use a template.
Like
But what
like
I
an
would say
iBook
is,
author, what type of templates are available?
I think that it's really easy to modify the ones that are here. So let me start a new one. I like this one because it's so simple, and it lets you modify things. And then if you just pull out the layouts, at the top you'll see all of the different templates there. And so let's say I want to modify one of the existing layouts. Let's see, Google, what's a Google-ish color? And let me get Google Classroom logo. So you can just go into the template and paste it in, and it becomes part of that template. And so it's pretty easy to modify the template pages and make them your own and customize them. So that would be my biggest recommendation. Let me change back to, well, I'm not going to change my display size, but you'll see that now if I go here and change this to that title slide, it'll have that picture. So it would be neat, like, I think, to take a template and make it your own, and it's much easier to make it beautiful and awesome. Also, like, let's say that I don't want this font. I want it to be whatever that font is. If I pull out the styles drawer, oh my gosh, it's not showing because it's too small. All right, I guess I have to change my displays. But like, let's say you're not satisfied with the font. So you have your styles here, and I can just say, okay, actually I want to, usually it tells me which style I'm using. Oh, chapter. And then I can just say redefine style from selection. So if you take one, like if you get one chapter the way that you want it to be and customize each of the heading fonts. So let's say, like, I don't want whatever this is. I want it to be hello world. And this font, whenever I have a header, I want it to be Hoffler text, and I want it to be purple. And then I can just redefine that style as well. So that's why, you can make any template your own, and it's much easier to have something that feels slick and refined rather than starting from scratch. So that's what I would do.
Now, are these the only templates we have available, or is it like Microsoft where you could, there's like a album with thousands of templates you can pull from?
There are so many templates. Some of them you have to buy. There are a limited number, I think 12 or something like that, that come with it. But if you look in the App Store and search iBooks Author, if you're willing to spend a little bit of money, there's, like, for $4 you can get a whole bunch of templates. So if you're not satisfied with the ones that come with it, but I think the ones that come with it are pretty versatile. Like, they're going to be Apple design, which, I mean, I'm not an Apple fangirl, but they do a pretty good job with design, and some of these other people I don't know about, so I would probably start with something Apple built and unmodify the heck out of it, rather than taking something that someone else did. I mean, there probably are some that are really good, but those are probably the ones that cost more. So, that would be my recommendation.
And I guess that one of the biggest questions is time frames, as far as like, don't wait until the last 2 weeks or month, or,
Yeah,
just from your experience, how long, project management, let's talk about project management.
okay. I would set some milestones for yourself, and I would decide, like, let's think about this, what would be good milestones? I think before you build the book, you should conceptualize it. So I would conceptualize your book. Think about, like, what is the flow of information for the practitioner? Because this isn't what I'm presenting for my teachers, it's what I'm presenting for my practitioner. So what is going to be the best way to do it? Have a plan for that. The next milestone I would do is probably create the design, the look and feel, because you'll have a good idea once you conceptualize it, what that look and feel might look like best. So for example, I honestly think like the hero's journey is a really good way to structure something like this, because you're trying to communicate this person, like, be a hero in your classroom. So here's the challenge I have put before you as the teacher. Here's the journey you're going to take as you read this book. So I really think like that's a really good way to think about it. And then if you are doing it something about a hero, like maybe you find some pictures of people like as superheroes, you know what I mean? Like this is a good way to kind of design the look and feel based on whatever is the way you conceptualize it. And then 3, start putting it together, but like make one chapter. And make sure that it's working for you, and then build the rest. And then plan the presentation, because the presentation is totally different than the book. Now you have to think about like this thing that's built for this one modality, now I have to show this off in a totally different modality. So knowing that this is sort of like, once you know the milestones, working backwards, like you know when this has to be done, I would say conceptualizing may not take long, but you may have to wait for your research to really know how you're going to conceptualize it. So then maybe you play it safe. And you
Have a
could
general
probably,
idea.
huh?
Have a more general idea of how.
Like maybe you do a look and feel that's related to the topic and less about like the story you're going to tell. So maybe you jump to this when you know you can't really conceptualize this yet, and start making one chapter, because maybe you can do some of the intro stuff without having your results.
Yeah.
So you skip this, go to this, and then figure this out later. But yeah, I would work backwards and figure out like, this is what I need to do. Also, how many of you have started playing with iBooks Author? Okay, a little bit. One thing that threw me off when I first started was how linear things were, and it's like you see these things and it looks like slides, and it looks like you can like take one and move it, but like once you have something at one level, it's just one long thing, and you can't like remix the way that you can remix slides. So you literally have to, for a section, plan that section in a linear way, not thinking of it. So this is where the planning ahead, like you may have a beautiful layout on page 3, but then you realize you have to take out some information on page 2, and it's going to shift the text all up. So, so maybe I would add a step. Actually, before making chapter 1, is draft it before you build it in iBooks Author, so that you know what you're going to do. Because the layout can be terrible, and you have this beautiful layout, and then you take out 3 paragraphs, and it messes everything up. So, yeah. I love iBooks Author, it makes slick stuff, but it does take a little planning.
Do you recommend storyboarding?
Yeah, I think storyboarding would be a really good idea.
Are you guys familiar with storyboards? Some of them are.
Yeah.
Frank, storyboarding?
I used a mind map for last
yeah.
semester, and it was pretty
Okay.
helpful.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it just when I was actually wanting to do film back in high school, but yeah.
Okay.
and I think that there are different ways, like I tend to, I guess this comes from my friend who taught English when I was in Georgia. You know, he had the brainstorm, the write then edit kind of philosophy. So he would say, once you're writing, don't edit. Don't stop yourself when you're in the middle of writing. Just write. Don't worry about whether you're going to remix it later. So you brainstorm sort of the structure, you write, and then you edit later. But I would make sure that the editing part happens as much as possible before you get into iBooks, because, yeah, if you have it written and you change it, it can throw a little bit of a wrench.
So you recommend doing all your typing and writing in a Word doc, and then when you get it polished, like you're ready to turn it in, then start doing the design and
Yeah.
dumping into iBooks.
Yeah, and working chapter by chapter works really well. Like if you know, I need these 5 chapters, and I mean, you don't have to know all your chapters ahead of time, but if you know chapter at a time what you're gonna do, and you can kind of finish that and say, that's a wrap, now I'm going to this chapter, that's gonna be better than trying to work on all of it at once and editing.
Since this lends itself more to a creative presentation, at what point does using too many fonts or colors or whatever become unprofessional rather than engaging?
That's funny, that's a good question.
Because I err on the side of too
Too
colorful, too this, too that.
Oh, too much.
Yeah, I go the other way with it. And so I don't want it to be like, dude, this is a master's thesis presentation. Why are there all these colors and sounds and lights flashing out at me? You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, like you can see with this theme that it has a lot of color to it with the different chapters.
Uh-huh.
I think if you like a lot of color, having it where each chapter has its own color, but
Rather
then
than
it
just
has.
font and, because that to me just looks like a research paper on a slide.
Oh yeah, I would, and this is all their boilerplate text. I mean, if you look at that E.O. Wilson one, it is very little. Like, well, I happen to go through a bunch that has a lot of text, but almost every page has something, and a lot of times it